Glad to have everybody, and good morning, Edward. So nice to have you here from Edward from the other side of the pond. And we'll go through today. It's just us, and just for just Q&A on anything and everything you want to cover. There's a few notes that I have for you guys before we open up the floor. Um, I'm sure most of you are familiar with virtual assistants. I know it sounds like sort of a subject matter completely off out of the outer space, if you will. But I use a virtual assistants. I've used them for a number of years. Um, the company that I use, they're actually terrific. One of the things that you may want to consider for your search is employing a virtual assistant. They are, if you get the right one, they're extraordinary and they're really inexpensive. For doing some mining, going through databases. Depend on the caliber of the virtual assistant. My Darlene, who does work for me, I mean, she'll do spreadsheets. She gets preparation for webinars, does marketing. I mean, it's really phenomenal, and everything in between. Excel spreadsheets to a business not even related to this. I mean, she's really wonderful. So I was speaking to the owner of the company, extolling her praises, and was talking to him and thought that maybe there could be some of the people who are on this call may find it very interesting. Sia is going to post the link in the chat area. Barry, who's the owner of the company, he's assured me that if anybody is looking for someone and they are reasonably inexpensive, he'll make sure you guys get a discount. So if you want to get a call with him, it's worth it. Set up a 10-15 minute call. Just let him know that I sent you so that he'll extend the whatever discounts he's able to. But if you're find yourself either for those that are working full time and could use an extra set of arms to help you with the search. It's a terrific idea. So it's and you should definitely explore it. First and some of them they can scrape through LinkedIn for business owners or evaluate certain databases if you end up acquiring, make phone calls, send emails, and everything the like. So I would urge you to reach out to Barry. And his last name it rhymes with desire. It's Coziahr, or pretty close to that, but it's Coziahr. So it rhymes with desire. He's a really good egg. So, and I think you get packages like 10 hours a week, 20, etc. So it's worth it. And Sia, you put that in the chat, how to get in touch with him. Good. Thank you. Okay. A couple other things. Sims, as a number of you on the call know, I'm happy to review Sims, review statements. If you're going to send me a Sim to review, I always need a couple of days, at least a couple of days, because most of them are Britain's smirking. As you're, because they're, sometimes they're 30, sometimes they're 60 pages, and I like to read them and put diligent notes. So always give me a couple of days to do that. On financial spreadsheets, please use the one that we have in the course because it makes your life a lot easier to put numbers into that spreadsheet because you could look at 3 years across, and it's also very easy for me to review it. We had Irene will get embarrassed, but I had a terrific call with Irene this week regarding a business that she's looking at. And as I told her on the call, she did an unbelievable job going through the sim, and the way we did it, we went page by page. This is the first one that she was looking at, so we went page by page. I will never give you my comments first. I want to hear how you're looking at things. So I had my notes. She proposed, and made her comments first, and then compare and contrast it to anything that I have. And I think out of 30 pages, I may have had only one that she didn't have, and she had a couple that I didn't have. So it was a great job. And I think that by using that financial statement, it made going through it much easier. And I'm sure Irene will agree, we're able to identify some things that really looked out of the ordinary. But one of the things that conversation really, the subject matter that really surfaced as a result of that is at the beginning, when you get a sim from a business, a deck from a business, and you may have a ton of questions with it. And in this particular case, we had a lot of questions related to the financials. When you go back to the broker or the seller, go through the sim first. Don't hit them with the financials first, because their mindset very easily could be they're getting way into the weeds, and they're asking for too much confidential information. It's very easy for them to take the wrong thing away from that. So first you go through the sim, because that's information that they put forth. And so you're asking questions, and then, subject to the answers that you get in there, if you're still interested, then you can go through the financials. You get a lot of sellers and brokers you got a lot of brokers that aren't even well versed in the financials. And so for them, they look at it and say, oh my God, they got, 15 questions, and they got to go back to the seller with 15. So the process, go through the sim first. And as I hope you guys recall, the way I read sims is, when I get a sim on a business that I'm considering, I read the sim first without making any notes, because very often the thing that you're making a note on is going to get answered later anyways. But it allows you to read it, objectively, take it all in, get a bit of a flavor for the business, and then go back a second time and read it and make your notes at that point. And you'll find that a lot of stuff already gets answered, or you get a little bit of a better understanding related to business, or it actually generates more questions. The other point that came out that conversation with Irene is, in areas that you may be looking for businesses, if brokers do not co-broke. The question that Irene asked, which was great, was, do I need to work with this one broker who brought me this particular deal, or I was working with, I got introduced to them, they found this deal, etc. The answer is no, you do not need to work with that broker solely, unless, of course, they're doing a magnificent job of finding new businesses or prospective businesses for you. But chances are they won't, because what happens is, unless it's a case of that particular broker owning a franchise like a Sunbelt or a VR or a Transworld in a territory, they may cooperate with other offices of theirs within the region, but they're not obligated to. With any other brokers, there's going to be no collaboration, no cooperation. They're not going to start calling other brokers. So it's a bit of a pain in the butt, but you have to reach out to individual brokers, which we talked about, I think, in the first webinar, and finding, regarding deal flow. If you have someone who's terrific and helpful and what have you, that's a different consideration, but there's no inherent obligation. And certainly, if you see after a short period of time that they're not bringing anything new to the table, you've got to expand your horizons and get in touch with brokers of other offices. So that's just a little bit of housekeeping. Does anybody have any questions related to those points, or anything you want to discuss further? Boy, you're an easy bunch. Okay, good. So we can open it up to Q&A. Um, Everybody on the call, everybody's a client of, and you following our program. We'd like to keep this a nice, tight community, but reminding everybody that any businesses that you looked at, you've probably signed an NDA. So keep the name of the business and the city apart, but it's good for you to, it would be very helpful if you let us know for a particular business, the type of business that you're looking at. And I know, Irene, example, we're looking at a landscaping, a more general services business, and Todd and Mary, we're looking at a couple of those too. So maybe you can collaborate and share some ideas. And the other thing I want to point out to you, if anybody wants to get in touch with anybody else on this call, send me an email. I'll put you in touch with one another. If you want to generate more of a community, you want to share emails. If anybody objects to it, let me know. But if not, I'm happy to circulate everybody's information, and you can have some communication and a bit of a sense of a community with each other. Okay, so who's got a question, or who has 10 of them? Okay, Yanal, go ahead. See ya. You're in charge. How are you?
Who's up? Is it me?
Yeah.
Oh, hey, Richard. Question on, I know in your material you talk about franchises. I actually skipped a little part of that because like I wasn't interested in them at first, and then now like a few franchises reached out, and I've kind of reconsidered them now as I learned more about it. And my particular question is like, what are your thoughts first on like the due diligence process for franchises? Um, how far can you go with like doing a Q of E and like all the due diligence from like a traditional kind of business, you could say, and then The particular one I'm looking at is like a newer one. It's in the wellness space. It's started in like 2019. So it's in like the health wellness space and mainly targeted to women, but men can, get the service as well. So so it's like new and it's like expanding on a new territory. So it's like really, I haven't been to one. I'm gonna go to one in New York City to kind of check it out. So like I'm trying to contemplate like, all right, is this just a trend right now, or is it gonna last forever? But yeah, I guess more broadly first on like franchises due diligence, and then specifically for a newer one, like how would you approach that one maybe differently than like a more established one?
Okay, well, I'll answer part of your question. I could guarantee you it's not going to last forever.
Okay.
That's one part of it. As far as due diligence is concerned, actually, if you go into the materials, you'll see we do a deep dive on due diligence for franchises. Franchises for due diligence for franchises are more in depth, but in a lot of respects, it's easier because you're so more in depth from a standpoint of you're investigating the franchisor and you have to investigate the business. So it's done on two fronts because you want to make sure that the franchisor provides the right support, that the bless you, Gabriel. They're proper, they're properly financed. They have systems in place, etc. So you have a whole laundry list of due diligence items related to the franchisor, and then related to the franchise itself, the franchisee or the unit itself. Now, in banners, which is the jargon that you'll hear, or system. That's the jargon that you'll hear within the world of franchise, which is referring to the brand. They call it a system oftentimes. You have a big advantage because you can do due diligence and a good part of your due diligence directly with franchisees. They already own one, not the one that you're buying, but ones that already exist, getting in front of them, talking to them, finding out if you had your choice, would you do this all over again? What are the pluses, the minuses related to the franchisor? Have they delivered on everything that they said they were going to deliver? And there's, again, in the chapter, in the lesson, I think it's lesson number 9, has all of that broken down. So the due diligence is more robust because you're doing it in on two levels, the franchisor and the franchisee, but parts of it are made infinitely easier because of the fact that you're able to speak to people that are within the system. They own franchises, so that's one part of your question. The second part related to the actual franchise. I love franchises. I think the concept. I think that the franchise epitomizes someone who gets business. In other words, they've managed the good ones have. Systemized everything. They have a recipe in place. It's not just ingredients. They have been able to demonstrate that on the whole, their recipe has worked in many instances repeatedly. I also believe that for people that either lack experience or lack confidence, a franchise could be a phenomenal way to start your universe of entrepreneurship. I mean, it really is. There are some potential downsides, which is how large you can grow it, and there are some recommendations I have, which I'm happy to expand upon if you want me to. Um, but I'm not a big fan of new franchises because to me they're just like a startup on steroids. It's proven itself to be successful in certain locations under certain conditions, but that doesn't mean it's going to be successful in the next location. There's usually a big out of pocket, and um, so I that's why I like buying. I love franchises, and for the right person, it's a perfect. I like buying franchise resales because that's a perfect marriage of all the benefits of a franchise with all the positives of buying an existing business. Now it becomes a challenge in the one that you cite because they may not have a lot of locations. So that's the downside because they don't necessarily have a proven model. The upside is if you really buy into what they're doing and decide that this is the road that you want to go down, banners or franchises that don't have a lot of locations offer you the opportunity to make the most amount of money because you can acquire a master territory or you can expand much quicker. You go buy a Taco Bell. My late partner and I, we have a co-investment in 118 Taco Bells and Applebee's. We can't buy more. I mean, you can't even get them, or they want to sell them to individuals. We can't buy them in groups anymore. You can't really expand. The markets are mostly saturated. When you get a new franchise, then they don't have a lot of territory exploited. And so you could either wrap up and negotiate a master franchise, which allows you the option. Basically, you have to you make a commitment to open up 5 of these in the next 10 years or whatever in certain locations. You can't do that with long established mature franchises. So that's one huge benefit. So you have to weigh all these things into consideration. I'm just very concerned on a franchise that may be deemed to be more trendy, which could be the case in wellness. And there's no shortage of franchises in the healthcare or health space, well space, if you will. So I would have more trepidation for that particular type of business within a franchise, and then layering on, new is a concern to me. I don't know enough about the particular one, but there are some concerns without question. I mean, does the possibility exist to buy an existing one, or it's just too new?
How do you
Just too
define
new.
established?
Say again. Sorry, Todd.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to ask, Richard, how do you define established? Is that years or maturity of the business?
It's a couple things. It's a great question. It's number of locations and years in business. I like to see ones that have turned around a couple times, like in other words, that there's been some resales. You also want to make sure that if you're getting into something that's newer, they don't have expansive reach. You want to make sure they have the capital, that the locations are doing well, because that's what it's like, one feeds the other. They need the franchise, the ongoing royalties to keep advertising, but you want to make sure they're spending that money in supporting the system, doing advertising, not just, keeping afloat. So that's part of the equation. That's really important. The other thing is only buy into franchise where the franchisor has a number of corporate stores or corporate locations, because that's the only way that they will know you're paid. If not, they're just selling locations. They've got to be in the business as well, so they understand what you're going through on a daily basis. If they're trying to exit their corporate-owned locations, that's a concern. There's not necessarily a specific ratio, but you want to make sure they're in it as well.
Got it. Just to pick up on that, like as far as the cons of a franchise, just generally speaking, my shallow idea of it is like, okay, you're constrained in that like marketing is kind of headed from the corporate office. You can't really change that many things, right? Like it's going to have the same look and feel. And then my next thing is like, I guess the exit, from what I gather, is like maybe like you have to stay almost like as a contract of like you have to own it for like 5 years or something, and then obviously there's like the royalty fees that you have to pay as well, or franchise fee. But is there anything like glaring that I'm missing there of like the cons of?
No. So think of it this way. You have to divide your personal preferences into control and support. Completely separate disciplines. If you're someone, I don't mean being a control freak, but if you're someone who likes to control what's going on and you don't mind giving up support, then a franchise potentially, if you want control and don't mind not having the support, then an independent business and non-franchise is for you. If you're someone who wants support and doesn't mind giving up control, then that's a potential franchise for you. Those are the two really high level attributes: is control and support, and whatever you feel more comfortable with. And again, it doesn't mean you're a control freak, but understand when you're in a franchise system, everything has to be done with the brand in mind, not with you in mind. And so what happens is what is better for the brand may not be good for you and your particular location, but ultimately it's better for the brand. And it's very hard, and understandably so, for people to see that, right? You invested money, bought a business, and you recognize that we'll take a food franchise, for example. You have a couple of items that you're forced to put on the menu, they're just not selling. Well, you got to carry them and advertise them anyways, or you got to be open certain hours, and you have no business during those hours, but you have to be open anyways. Well, it's like tough luck, because that's for the betterment of the brand. And you have, and it's not always, sometimes it's even to your detriment, but the brand comes first. And so I love the concept of franchises. I would be the worst franchisee in the universe. And not because I'm a control freak, but I want to try different things. I want to market different things, try new initiatives, keep testing new things, trying different hours, menu items or other products, or bring in, try certain promotions or whatever. So I wouldn't fit well within a franchise system. But on the other hand, someone who, again, may not have the confidence or experience, or feels just better getting into entrepreneurship, having some of that support in place, or looks at the franchise itself and thinks this is a really good concept and I could never build it for this price, it may make sense for you. But I staunchly believe in buying a resale. I don't know. It depends on the contract, whether or not you have a minimum holding period. Most that I've read, I don't believe so. There's another guy, by the way, if anybody's looking at franchises, and I'm not sure if he doesn't charge, but there's a guy by the name of John Hayes, Hayes, and he's at not Florida Atlantic, Palm Beach Atlantic University, I think, PBAU. I spent a couple of days with him. There's some charities he was involved. They help support. He's like the guru of franchises. If you look him up online or in LinkedIn, and if you have a particular banner or want to set up a call with him, ask him a question, he's usually pretty open to stuff like that. I know he does consulting work. He may not be there yet, and certainly feel free to use my name as an introduction. He might say, who the hell is that guy? But he's really, really knowledgeable. And if you have like some other generic questions to pass by him, he's a terrific resource, a really good guy too.
Richard, Mary and I have noticed that, like with franchises, normally you actually have to live in that area as well. Is this kind of true throughout the franchise industry, or okay, maybe it's just the ones we've looked at then?
Yep. If they're selling it to an, let me rephrase that. If they're selling it to an owner operator, generally they will want you to be there because you're operating it. What has happened in some of the mature franchises, they've started institutionalizing, meaning they've been selling to a lot of investors and private equity firms. So they've ruled that out and they put operators into place. But typically speaking, if they're selling to an owner operator, yes, the answer is yes. Where they do make some exception is if you have one in Indiana and you decide you want to expand and you're going to open one up in Ohio or whatever, that you could potentially put in an operator. But they want owner operators. That's their big challenge. Every franchisor, their big issue. And that's why when they go to open up additional locations, and we talked about earlier, like this master franchise that you can acquire, they would prefer to sell a new location to somebody who's already in their system, who's proven to be successful, because they don't want failures on their hand. That hurts, it hurts their reputation. So they certainly do want owner operators. The best one to buy is Chick-fil-A.
Yeah.
$5,000. Did you know that?
They're hard to get though, right?
Did you know that? It costs $5,000.
I heard you're not actually owning it though.
Yeah, you own 50% of it. You have to be a manager in a store for a year, and then you buy. Then you can acquire a franchise. I think it's $5,000. They pay everything. They cover the expense over it. You end up splitting the profits with them 50-50. And you can only own one.
There's exceptions. There's some guys in College Station, my old stomping grounds, that I've known had a few, but those are very
probably because no one else wants to go there.
Whoa!
Are you making fun of A&M people? Wow. What's going on there?
Yeah.
I think I need to go on mute for a second. But anyway, yeah, Chick-fil-A I like Chick-fil-A because I think they set up their franchise model to be more of the, normal good manager that doesn't have a lot of the business backing, financial backing that other investors have.
It's a great model when you think about it, not just in franchise, but when you think about it from a standpoint when everyone in the call will eventually own their own business, and you think about how the priority that they've placed, not on just like some franchises, which is the duplication of a concept, they're much deeper than that into how the experience is at each Chick-fil-A. Like, you don't wait in line. I mean, you could be waiting in line, but they're out there with their tablets taking your orders. I mean, the menu items, they're careful about their ingredients, of course. You can't walk into, you don't find a dirty Chick-fil-A. Like, I don't know about you. Like, has anyone ever seen a dirty Chick-fil-A? Never. But I've seen a dirty McDonald's, right? And a dirty Burger King and a dirty Taco Bell. I mean, so the things that they do as far as their operations are concerned is there's a lot of lessons to be learned. And I think their model that they put someone into place to become the owner, operator in partnership with them, they've already been a manager for a year. So they know there's like no training, so it's a very, very smart model, and their sandwiches are unbelievable. So that helps. Okay, who's up next? Gabe.
How you doing today, Mr. Parker?
I'm doing great. How are you? But don't call me Mr. Parker.
Don't call you Mr. Parker. Do I call you Richard?
Yeah, 100%.
All right, I go Mr. until I'm told otherwise. So
No, that smart.
well, I'm just curious about owning a business while you're working a 9 to 5. Do you think it's possible? Can you own one that operates 5 to 9, like a food distributor? I mean, I'm a young guy, so I'm pretty willing to work 100-hour weeks in a way. So I don't
Yeah, I
have
mean,
much. I don't.
and I think on some prior calls like this, we've talked about it. As long as you're not looking at it as being absentee, meaning, if you look at it and say, oh, I've got 8 hours at this place, I'm going to work 6 hours at this other one. That's okay. It's like, but I'm not buying it and not working it is buying it and not working it doesn't make sense. I haven't seen that work frequently, but yeah, I mean, as long as you don't drive yourself into the ground, and some people look at it and say, and you're young and you got a lot more energy. I admire it. And now's the time to be doing it, because I don't think, I'm sure you've heard it before, and if you haven't, you'll hear it once now from me, which is really important. Like you never get away from paying your dues, right? I mean, it's still, no matter how much people want to make money quickly, there's no escaping it. You got to pay your dues, and so the time to be putting in a lot of work is when you don't have all the obligations, all the bills, all the family, all of that stuff, and it is doable as long as you're prepared to do it. And then what the goal, I think, should be is it the type of business where if you can get things going that you can give up your day job and focus full time, or is it just a side hustle? And being very sure that if it's a side hustle, treat it like a side hustle. Don't work 8 hours a day on a side hustle. But if it's a business that can become something, the goal is to eventually stop doing the regular job and devote yourself 100% to that particular business, because it is hard to scale and it does get tired. And you don't want to be having that kind of schedule for a decade. I mean, it's pretty tough. It's definitely doable if you want to do both. I mean, there's no question. It's just a matter of hours and effort.
Yeah. And what you said about the absentee model, I mean, you see it all over online. You're like, oh, absentee, that's the way to go. Just never step foot. They're like, I travel around the world, never step foot into my business. It's complete bogus. I just see it every day at my internship. I'm like, even the other day, the CEO had a meeting with all 300 employees, and it was just about referrals and how to make the proper referral. How the CEO knows how to do that is because he was a financial advisor before he was the head of the CEO of the company. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like he's not, you know what I mean? He knows every little minute detail. How is someone who wasn't a financial advisor, or at least doesn't understand what they do, going to go talk about how to refer people when they've never done it?
Well, it's a great example. So the person who has no experience whatsoever and is teaching other people how to do the same things, they're called consultants, right? Because they're like Captain Obvious, right? But so, but it's exactly the point we're talking about, which is, you can evolve a business to extract yourself from it over time. You can, but you can't start from day one. And I see all those ads and all those programs or whatever, and you're wise beyond your years because you realize it early. It's complete nonsense. And we've talked about it before. Even if you buy something as simplistic as some of these programs, buy a laundromat and it's absentee owned. It's not. What happens if someone quits? What happens when the machines break? What happens if the place floods? What happens if you have to replace equipment? Those businesses are not absentee. And so if you buy one with the concept of thinking you're going to be absentee, and you have a job, and in the middle of the day, you have problems at your business, you're just going to go out of business. You got to learn the business, immerse yourself. And then if your plan is saying, okay, over the course of the next year, I want to learn this really well, want to really understand and keep this business simple. And then starting in year 2, I'm going to start making plans to bring someone into place to potentially become a manager. Yes, doable, very doable, no doubt, but not from the starting gate. I think, I don't know if you saw I do these live streams with Deb Curtis. We had one, and my sentiments have been, absentee owned businesses usually equal absentee profits. There's just no escaping it. Okay. Oh, my glasses on, I can't hardly see the screen, but okay, I saw Britton raise his hand. Go
So
ahead.
just real fast, I think, that's it. How fast does it normally take to file for an entity? I am, obviously I have to jump into due diligence. We got some positive feedback. So I don't know if I haven't even emailed you, but we had a final call with the seller today, and it seems like we are good to go. And so I'm like, I feel like
Now
the
what?
government, huh?
So now what?
Yeah,
Right?
now what? Well, just I feel prepared. I gave my binder to my wife to take a look at. She's gonna hopefully be my my extra pair of eyes on things, just from a due diligence process perspective. But I just thought that was real practical. I'm looking over here at the Texas Secretary of State site, and I'm like, oh, probably should have started this earlier.
So your question, just so I understand it, go ahead, just to repeat it.
Is how long does it normally take? Do I need to accelerate somehow? Does it take longer than 2 months to set up an entity to then purchase the business?
Oh, what time is it now? 4:04 p.m. You could have one set up by 4:06.
Is that right?
Oh yeah, you could do it online. Your attorney could do it for you in a nanosecond. Once you determine whether you want to have the entity structure, it's very simple to set up the actual entity. Where you're going to run into a little more time is based on our conversation. You have a partner, okay, and so you're going to have the entity, okay,
Right.
Britain's Conglomerate LLC, and then you're going to have an operating agreement as part of that LLC. That operating agreement in a C Corp typically could be called a partnership agreement. That operating agreement is going to effectively be the relationship between you and your partner. There's going to be a manager or 2 managers appointed. It's going to talk about the distribution of units. They're not shares, the units, but it's going to say everything related to the operation of the business. Britain is going to be the manager of that business. He's going to pay the salary of X. The distributions are going to work out as following. The following items, as we talked about, are subject to unanimous agreement between the manager and the members, because in an LLC, there's members and managers. And so that operating agreement takes a little longer.
Okay.
Not that long, because it's still pretty simple. So the entity set up nanosecond online.
It doesn't have to go through like the approval process in the government. I thought it took like a few weeks to get back. No.
Yeah, you'll take time to get your EIN number.
Okay.
But the actual setup of the entity, as long as the name is available, and even if it's not, you could do it as a DBA typically. But the actual entity is really, really quick. But you're going to have so much to do during due diligence. Just get ahead of it. Tell your attorney, here's the name of the company that we want, and we also we need the operating agreement, and here's the points that we agree to, and tell me if there's anything else you think we need to consider, and they get that drawn up, and then you can go back and visit it. But the process itself is quick, pretty quick.
Cool.
Actually, getting the EIN number is also really fast too. It doesn't take a couple weeks.
But
Yeah.
the thing I was going to mention, though, we were talking to a lender yesterday, and his guidance was that get your LLC set up right away once you get the confirmation from the seller, because he said the SBA can take up to like 60 days to recognize your LLC. I thought that was quite long, but that's what he had mentioned.
The government, what do you expect? Yeah. I mean, you could, it's a no-brainer, easy to do. So you might as well get it set up. But in worst case scenarios, now they hear this related to the SBA, but if you weren't going the route of an SBA loan and you set up you could set your entity up almost on the way to the meeting, to the closing, because the EIN could come afterwards, that the seller needs, or you couldn't open up a bank account, so your money would have to be held in escrow. But that part is easy. But it's a very good point that Todd makes, because if it takes them that long, then you want to get it set up.
That's great.
I don't know why I feel like I put on my glasses, I hear better.
Is it because you're trying to read?
Maybe I'm just getting old. You just notice that sometimes. I don't know. Someone's talking to you, don't understand what you're saying, and put my glasses on for a second. Okay, now I can hear you. Maybe I got to lip read. It's crazy what happens to a human being. Okay.
The other thing I was thinking about, setting up the entity early. Like, for instance, we have one that we haven't used yet, but it's really in a different industry than what we're going after right now. So I think you can still change that code. But the challenge with ours, for instance, I have an existing LLC that's not active and using it for some other business, is that we're looking actually to use in another state. I think that might create a challenge. I was just thinking, if you're going to stay in the same state and you're focused on one industry, maybe if, you're concerned about that 60 days, just set one up now. Do you have an opinion on that, Richard?
Yes, because you're going to have to set up an entity in the state where you're doing business. Now, you can potentially keep the same name. Sometimes it's called a foreign corporation. It's a designation where you have a business in New York and you want to operate in Florida. You're effectively moving the business, so you're opening up a business in Florida, and it's given it a foreign designation. I want to also ask after about that, because to see if there's any discrepancy between the various states in Australia. But you will need to set up with the Department of State, Secretary of State. They go on their different terms, but it's all public information in the state that you're doing business. And there could be some tax issues. There may or may not be, but you need an entity set up, because you're going to need an occupational license, those type of things. So you will need to set up an entity there. However, what I would caution people is, if you're looking in various geographies to acquire a business, don't keep setting up entities in every state. Wait till you're finalized, because now you're going to spend a whole lot of money, and then you could dissolve it. But if certain times of the year you have to renew your application. So it just becomes expensive for no reason. And I think your EIN you can use from your main business. You have to speak to your accountant or attorney, but I believe it could fall below if it's deemed to be like a foreign corporation. Foreign meaning just a different state. I wanted to ask Edward, just for my own education, if I open up a business in Sydney, and I start doing business in one of the other provinces, or Melbourne or whatever, do I need another do I need another license in a different state?
It's only in America you have those complications with states, with alcohol taxes and everything, taxes in general. So,
yeah. Well, in Australia,
it's very simple.
Challenge with the alcohol, not the alcohol taxes, right? My wife tells me, you'll never meet an Aussie who doesn't like a good cocktail, right? So there's if I set up a business in Sydney, I don't need to I operate in Melbourne or wherever, and I don't need another license. It all falls under one.
It all comes under one Australian securities ASIC, one entity, one federal entity.
Yeah, we managed to make things a lot more. We have to employ we have to employ a lot of lawyers in this country, so we got to keep them busy.
Yeah, they've engineered that way, so they get more money.
Yeah,
100%.
Yeah, I agree. Richard,
okay.
I've got another potential. I was encouraged it might be too low level of a problem, but going into the deal that I'm looking at, it's on the smaller side, right? And so from a take-home pay, our family lives fairly frugally as it is, and so it should not be an impact. But my thought is, okay, I've got a smaller bucket of money that I'm needing to work with, health insurance, we're going to looking into that. All of that's going to be coming into this smaller bucket of money. My thought is, because I'm having to travel about 100 miles to go to this, or it's full round trip, it's 50 miles each way. Does it make more sense when you have a smaller bucket of money to get more tax savvy to say, do I have a boss management company that then is employed as an like a 1099 executive services, and I'm able to invoice the operating company, and that way I almost create a whole other P&L that I could expense other things through a little bit more savvy. That way, again, from the partnership, even makes it a little bit more clean cut of what's being run through my bucket of money versus, and like as an employee salary versus trying to take it to the business. And even things like, what do you call it? Like mileage is expenses. I know when I was working for my company in a project, I could only expense the difference between my office, my home office to my house and the client site. And so I know there's some arbitrage there that I'm going, if I could find a way to have a PO box that my entity or my service entity is based out of that's local, and that way I can expense the majority of that mileage, that would just be, again, a better way to utilize some of that bucket of money. Or am I trying to wring too much out of this little rag and it's like, just go sell some more, auto work. And
Well, you know what? The last sentence that you made, yes, of course, the overwhelming answer to that is yes. But in between now and then, you still have to deal with the realities on the ground of your take-home pay and making sure you can keep one nostril above the water. Right, Gabe? We had this conversation about one nostril above the water. We talked about that. So what you want to do, but on the other hand, don't over-index. You got to speak to your accountant, but I'm going to give you some general guidelines. You can't get reimbursed for gas to commute to work, but I believe there is a cutoff by which over a certain amount of mileage you may be able to. Similarly, if you get reimbursed for mileage, they take into account strictly the portion that's related to work, so you can't deduct 100%. But so in your case, because of the travel is extensive, that may not apply, but you want to make sure of it. It is entirely possible that you can do all of this very cleanly through one entity. In other words, let's say you're going to be taking a salary of, call it $100,000, and you look at this and say, well, some of this stuff, because it's pre-tax money, it'll be helpful if the company pays for it or a certain above, and maybe I need $30,000 in those type of expenses, so I'll take a $70,000 salary and I'll run $30,000 through the business. There'll be some savings. You just have to go through what those are potentially. So, for example, you can write off your home office. If you have a mortgage on your house, the square footage in your home office, you can write off as an expense. There's other ones related, potentially travel, some parts of meals, entertainment, etc. But I would go through this diligently with your accountant first before you start getting crazy and setting up multiples, because you may end up spending more in professional fees and managing the books. And if you're going to be doing it yourself, I mean, the time you're going to be spending on QuickBooks, putting through receipts, whenever you can go see another customer. So I think you may be able to construct it in a way that could do everything through the business, as long as of course, if it's legal and you have a partner, and just as long as they're okay with it.
okay.
I don't think you need to get as complex as you think you may be.
Okay. That's good. That's a fair way of looking at it. Going, okay, setting the salary maybe even lower, and then running the rest of it. If that's going to be the case anyway, you should be able to do it to the business. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Richard, I got a question.
Yes.
I've gone into due diligence on the business that I sent you quite some time ago. It's high amount of goodwill. My question is, without incurring too much cost in the due diligence process, I feel like the next point of negotiation, even in due diligence, is going to come around the shareholders agreement because we kept the owners in for 20%. Do you have any good tactics for flushing out the hard questions up front? I'm trying to use the broker to do the questioning, because we've got the ongoing relationship post-sale if it goes ahead, which I think it will. But their expectations, I don't think we're quite aligned on the expectations of how much is going to be taken from dividend-wise from the company, given they've run it for 23 years. And what we want to do when we retain the capital for debt funding, which is probably not a contentious issue, but also for growth.
Right.
Any ideas on broaching that question with them, other than just going early and going at it?
Yeah, and in a lot of ways, it's a great question, because it could become a sensitive issue. And I think the point that you having the broker be the buffer, deliver potentially bad news, or have the hard conversations is a good tactic on the onset. It's probably not the broker who's going to get the resolution, but they could set the table for the conversation and at least start it. I'm a big believer that in due diligence, you attack all the big items first. Because if you can't come to an agreement, why do you want to go through 3 or 4 weeks of due diligence, spend all kinds of money and time and accountants and attorneys and can't get that resolved? And so I believe in addressing the big issues first. That's number one. The second thing is I would give the broker one stab at it. That's it. Here's the issues. Here's what we need to resolve. Mr. or Mrs. Broker, I need you to at least take the seller's temperature. Like I need to, here's what we propose. The broker is representing the seller, correct?
Correct.
So you would give it to the broker, not from a negotiating standpoint, but here's how we're thinking about it. Why don't you run this by your client? And then depending on what the pushback is, I would get right into the mix with the seller. It's a hard conversation potentially, but if you frame it in a way, especially when it's someone who's going to be retaining equity, you're the best tactic that you have or strategy that you have is actually the truth, which is we want to be able to have as much money as possible to service the debt and grow the business. And so ultimately, by retaining equity in the business, you are going to benefit by that plan. Okay. And by that strategy. Now we know you have something that you need to live on, but there's got to be a meeting of the minds, because if they can't see it, your problem may be greater than this negotiation. Because everybody's got to be rowing in the same direction, which is we want to do right by the business without raping it.
Yeah. Have you seen in most of the shareholder agreements that you've gone into dividend policies, detailed dividend policies, or just basic ones that will declare a dividend as and when the company, is able to do so? Or what wording have you seen predominantly?
I've seen both, which is in one case where they say dividends will be cleared when excess cash equals whatever. It could be a percentage of the revenue, it could be over margin. There's a definition to when there's going to be a forced distribution. Okay. Now that resolves one potential issue, but the reality is that the partners and whoever's running the business, where people get crazy who are in a minority position, they say something like, well, how can I leave it up to you to declare distributions or dividends, right? I'm going to get screwed. Well, no, you're not going to get screwed, because if you get screwed, I get screwed. Meaning if there's $100 to distribute and you own 23% of the business, you're going to get $23 and I'm going to get, $77. That's math. So no one's getting screwed, but we want to make sure we're doing right by the business. So your choice is, what you may want to do alternatively is agree that you won't have a hard formula for 2 years or something along those lines, so that you can get your footing in the business. You can understand it. You'll get a better a picture of the business. You don't want that distribution to be subject to unanimous voting, because the business, that's one of those things where it's got to be based on majority. Okay, because the minority shareholder can hold up everything related to that distribution.
Okay, and when you're looking at the balance sheet and you see a business that's sitting on a lot of cash and a lot of retained earnings, would it be a fair assumption to assume that they've been fairly conservative with the distributions of profits?
Fair assumption, correct. An assumption nonetheless, but a fair one.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Very good. That's good. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Do 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 do. Any other questions? I've got a couple. Okay. So actually, it dovetails right on Edward, because I had a couple things that came up in the last couple of weeks. So talking about unanimous issues and what have you, and I think spoke to one of you guys this week about this, which is when you get into a partnership agreement, it's reasonable. You need someone like, I told this to someone this week, and I think they were a little stunned when I said, I'd rather own 49% of a business than 50% of a business, because 50% you can get hold up on it. You could get stuck on everything, versus someone's got to run the business. I mean, if not, especially in a smaller business, there's a recipe in place to have a standstill all the time. Someone's got to be the boss. There's no escaping it. There's going to be a majority control and there's going to be minority position. So, but individuals that are in a minority position that could still be in a meaningful minority position, I'm not talking about 3%, 1%, etc. I'm talking about you have a partner who's the money person and you're the operations person and you're going to own 51% of the business and they're going to own 49. And they're entitled to 49 because without their money, you can't buy the business. So it's a good partnership. Everybody brings something to the table. Well, in those type of scenarios where everybody's brought something to the table, it's only fair that certain issues related to the business are subject to unanimous votes. Some things, the daily operations of the business are run by the individual, typically who owns 51% or majority, and they got to run their business and the other partner can't be a hindrance. But certain things it's only fair that are subject to unanimous control, such as selling of any assets, taking on any debt, bringing on employees over a certain level of compensation. Those big, impactful things, I just think, and I've been on the majority side more than the minority side, but I just believe that that's just fair. Because you want to be able to go into a partnership, everybody's got to feel terrific, like a marriage. At the beginning, everybody's very happy, right? And very excited. So you want to make sure that it's fair, it's equitable. There's certain parts of it, and you don't want to allow the minority shareholders to hold up. Someone's got to run the business. Similarly, if someone owns 5% of the business, they got to understand. They have no input. They may have their opinion may be heard, but nothing is going to hinge upon their agreement. Even to extent of saying if you own 95%, some of those things related to that would be a case. There's such a small partner. You can't even let them stop you from some of those things that should be subject to unanimous vote, where there's a much closer holdings of the equity. So if you have 95% and they have 5, they have no say in anything, unless it could be something like, for example, where they're exposed to certain liability. But there's always ways around it. So if you want to take on debt and they don't agree, you can indemnify them for that debt. Those small shareholders can't hold up the business. You know, what if the holdings are equal or pretty close, then fair is fair. I mean, and you got to be fair with partners, especially if they're bringing something to the table. They're bringing money. You wouldn't have the business without it. So you got to be fair.
Have you seen it where, so the current agreement right now that we've talked through is that I could buy him out over time, every 2 years, 5%. Can you see that causing any pain points, any friction as the company gets more successful, as it grows, like I'm hoping? As that stair step happens, the hope would be, right, I'm taking more responsibility off the partner's plate, and that way, you know, he's getting closer to mailbox money than even before. But just trying to figure out if there's any potential. We've talked about, hey, maybe we love it. I love it to where I want to get even closer to 50-50 than we are right now. Or, you know, anyway, I just don't want to end up souring things by executing on the thing because it's financially or it's best for in my situation to buy him out. Does that make sense?
Yes. Okay. So a couple of things. First of all, you absolutely want a formula in place. You're going to agree that the business is going to be valued at XYZ formula up until a certain point. So, for example, let's say you say, well, we're buying the business at 3.17 times multiple. So I could buy you out at that same multiple anytime within the next 5 years or 3% a year, whatever it is. But the multiple stays the same for a certain period of time. And you're hoping that the bottom line increases, so you're multiplying a larger number. Because at the beginning, fair, you know, it really is fair. Now they may come back and say, well, if you want to, but if you do want to buy, or they may come back and say, no, if you want to buy me out in the first 5 years, the multiples goes up, and that's also fair. The point being is you got to have a formula, because if not, the relationship can sour like at the speed of light, and so you want to avoid that because that could really hang up a business. Now, I'm very much of the belief that if someone helped you get into business and lent you the money, and unless they're really detrimental, well, you know what? Tough luck. You got to live with that. They got you into business. And if they don't want to be bought out, they shouldn't be bought out unless they're detrimental to the business. Because I think people have a tendency to forget where they came from. I'm not saying you're like that, but I think people would start making a little bit of money and thinking, oh, I'm doing all the work, and they're taking, and they're getting their mailbox money, and they're not doing any work and whatever, and they don't want to sell, and you start to begrudge them a little bit, but you forgot how you got into this in the first place.
Yeah.
Okay, and I think so. To me, that goes beyond business. That just goes to like a human relationship. And so and that's just my opinion of how I like to operate. And so I think it's the right thing to do, but I don't judge anybody. People may think differently, but
When you
I think
say the right thing to do, what would that be?
I think the right thing to do is you have a formula in place to buy each other out. We talked about having that Mexican standoff, which, by the way, I'll explain to everybody in a minute. You should have the right to buy each other out. There may be a period that nobody can buy anybody out, but I think it's also fair I think it's actually the fairness in your situation actually comes from your partner's perspective, meaning that if they come to you within 5 years and want you to buy them out, there's a formula in place, you should buy them out. Have the ability to buy them out. They got you started, they're ready to go, and I think they earned that right to be bought out because of them putting you in business. That's what I think is fair.
But should we not put anything in place? Should I not be pushing, or I don't know if pushing is the right word. Should I not be trying to put something in place where there's a schedule of me buying out?
If they're comfortable with that. Yeah, if you think it makes sense. I mean, I think you should have the option, but not the obligation to buy. Let's say you own 60% of the business and they own 40. I think you have the right, but not the obligation to buy 5% a year over 8 years, something along those lines. And I think you could put it in place. At the same time, I think you need to feel your partner out regarding that before you table it in writing, because they may get offended, and it might change the way they look at you as far as a partner. They may be thinking, hey, I'm going to make this investment. There's going to be money to perpetuity. I'm not just going to put this guy in business, and right now he needs the money, but as soon as business turns good, then he's going to buy me out, and I'm going to be out of my investment. So I think it's something that you should have the conversation with them. And do you want to have something in place that there's an option to buy out? I'm not sure that I like it altogether. I prefer that thing that we were talking about. I'm not sure if everybody knows. I prefer this clause, which has been referred to as a Mexican standoff, which is the following. Because what happens is sometimes one of the partners has the money and one of them has the experience, and so the partner with no money is always worried that the partner with no money is always, or less money, is worried that the other partner is going to come to them and try to buy out the rest of their shares when they can't afford to buy the business. Right? Does that make sense to everybody? It's a concern. So you have what's called a Mexican standoff, which is, I'm not even sure if it's appropriate correct anymore, but yeah, what the fuck? Okay. So here's how it works. I buy a business with Gabe. Gabe lends me $500,000 to buy the business. I have no money. We buy the business. I'm working the business. Gabe says, hey, this thing is really, really doing well. Okay. It's worth a lot of money. Gabe comes to me and says, hey, I'm going to give you $100,000 to buy the business. What choice do I have? Now, Gabe steals the business from me. I did all the work. Okay. The business, I know that on paper, to anybody with half a brain, the business is worth $1 million. It's obvious. I own 50%. That should be 500,000. And I got to give up this business for $100,000 just because I don't have any money. What a Mexican standoff does is whoever the offering partner is, they're the offeror and I'm the offeree. If Gabe gives me an offer on the business, and it's whatever offer he gives me, I have the right to match that offer and buy him out on the exact same terms. So it de-incentivizes everybody to not be predatory, and it incentivizes everybody to deal hands above the table. And so they refer to it as a Mexican standoff, and I'm sure the legal community has a much more politically correct name for it now. That's an old name, but that's the concept of it, right? And so it's what you want to have in place. And these partnership agreements at the beginning, sometimes they're difficult, but the goal is you want to get all this stuff agreed to in advance to the best of your ability, because then in a good relationship, in a good partnership, you're going to sign it, you're going to put it in a drawer, and you're never going to take it out again until there's an issue or you have to sell the business. That's right. It's like a prenup. And so you want it to be fair, and also not to take, from where you guys sit, to not take your eyes off your fries, right? Meaning, don't take your eye off the ball. If you're getting into partnership with someone because they're bringing money to the table, remember, you can't buy the business without their money. So you got to be fair. You got to be reasonable. And you know what? Maybe you wanted to get 80%, but the reality is you can only get 30 or 40 or whatever that number is. Okay. But it gets you into business. And you don't want to let the playing the what ifs, to this, to that. If you have a great partnership, then one of the best partnership I ever had, we didn't even have a partnership agreement. We actually wrote it on the back of a menu at Coach St. Luke Barbecue. That was a partnership agreement. And then we ran into big difficulty a few years later, and we came up with a resolution to that he was actually going to buy me out, and it was like a 4-second conversation. I mean, it was because everybody's heart was in the right place, and no one was looking to mess around with everybody. But it doesn't always work that way. So you try to have those over conversations. You don't be a pig. I'm not accusing you of being that, but I'm just saying you want to try to think about every scenario, but you won't.
Right. I think that's his concern was going, anything we put on paper, we can have each other's lawyers try to rip each other to shreds. And I don't want that. We don't want that. So he's a little bit skeptical of what's being put down on paper, but is the heart of the deal still there? And I think, I'm not trying to be greedy, Richard. I'm just going, this is a smaller SDE project than I was willing to look at. He's seeing more potential than I am. And so there's a healthy balance and trust factor in this.
Yes.
And I'm going, technically any other business I'd buy, I'd be learning a new industry. I'd be joining peer groups. I would be doing X, Y, and Z to train myself. But he's providing a very, community focused approach that's like his own training mechanism. And so it's like, I see value in all of that, but I'm like, man, 40% of the company, it's like on a smaller pie. And yes, I'll be getting more of the initial payment from a salary perspective. Anyway, I'm capitalizing.
No. You and I talked about it extensively. I think you're looking at it the right way for the most part. Okay. But I also think that you're looking at it from a standpoint of the following. Your learning curve, yes, your learning curve would be longer without him, no doubt. But you could learn the business. This is not a business of sending men to the moon. This is a pretty straightforward business. You can learn that. The one thing that I believe that they bring to the table, based upon what you've told me, which I think adds tremendous value, is the acceleration of potential growth or expansion. They will recognize much quicker than you. Because you're going to be looking at it and saying, geez, I don't know if we can take the next step and buy something else. You're taking out enough to just live and feed your family. If you're the right guy and you're turning this thing in the right direction and building upon it, chances are the next acquisition, they'll be the one putting up the majority of the money and bringing you along because you're the perfect operator. And the other point being is, it's a smaller business than what you originally thought about. It may not be perfect, but it's going to give you some unbelievable experience. You're going to know within a couple of years. It's a hard business to mess up because it's a nice, solid business. So you'll know within a couple of years that maybe this is not the business for you, right? That you just can't grow it or whatever. It's a certain level and chance. And if that's the case, you have the perfect partner to sell it to.
Exactly. Yeah. That's the
so
other.
I think I just put a lot of value getting into the world of entrepreneurship, to aligning yourself with people that are, this is someone who's in the business and in the business successfully a number of times. And to me, I just think there's a lot of value to aligning yourself with people that already are at where you want to get.
That's great.
And as long as your wife doesn't beat you up over doing this, you'll be okay.
It's exactly right. I just got to figure out some good messaging and show her the numbers. That'll be
Yeah,
good.
she's got to be 100%. You just got to make sure she's 100% on board. And if she's not, you don't do the deal.
Yeah. Pigs get fat, but hogs get slaughtered, right? That's
That's right.
don't
That's
push
right.
don't push my luck.
Don't push your luck with your wife.
Oh, or my wife,
Bad
wanted
career
like
move.
that, or the business partner, right? I was thinking about
Or the business partner. And if you have to choose between the two, push your luck with your business partner.
Exactly.
If faced with having to decide, in my humble view.
100%
What else
agree.
you got? Kitties? Nothing? Oh, I got. Oh, okay. Gabe, go ahead.
Yeah, so I just have a question. So when you form like your LLC for, I guess, buying businesses to, I guess, protect yourself, do you is like say you're going to partner with somebody else on a deal to buy a business, will you just partner with them for that business? So your company's partnering with that person kind of a thing?
So you're saying if you form an LLC and
Yeah,
the LLC, you form a company.
yeah.
Now, very often what happens, well, there's two things that could happen. Sometimes there's a partner, you and Irene buy a business together. You form a corporation together. That corporation strictly buys that one particular business. If you go and do something else, you probably own a separate entity unless you're doing it with that partner. And even if you are doing it with that partner, you probably still have a separate entity. But it's not like everything that you do going forward falls under that unless you actually are making those acquisitions. I'm not sure if that was the question.
That was the question. I was kind of confused on if you kind of just form one LLC or you form new LLCs each time you buy a business with a new person.
Well, you typically are going to form new LLCs every time you buy a business, unless you're buying a business. For example, you own uh, Bob's Candies, and now you're buying another candy store or another candy business. You may roll it into that one particular LLC because you want to do all the business through one LLC. However, there's certain types of businesses that you definitely don't want to do that. For example, Britton, could I disclose the type of business that you're buying? Is that okay? Okay, that's all right. So an auto body business.
Yeah.
And if you're buying an auto repair business, as example, you're buying Bob's auto body business. And then in a year from now, you want to buy John's auto body business down the street. Well, you'd look and say, well, I want to combine the two because I want to call them both Bob's. And then it helps the branding. And when you open up the third one and the fourth one, it's going to have 4 of these Bob's locations around the city. And people are going to start to raise awareness. Well, that's great. And that's what you want to do. But you'd want to have separate LLCs or companies for each one. And the reason why is you want to enter into a lease on each premise separate and apart. Because if business number 3 starts doing poorly, if everything is under one entity, they will hold that one entity as a guarantor or responsible for the lease. Or God forbid, there's a lawsuit. Well, and the lawsuit happened at Bob's Auto Body store number 4. Well, if you have everything under one entity, all the businesses are exposed. So in that case, that's more of a legal and a legal issue. And so in some cases, it would necessitate opening up separate LLCs, even for companies that seem to be affiliated with the main one. Retailers do that all the time. Separate lease.
Wouldn't it go the other way around though? Now, say you want to exit, but you have all these under 4 different LLCs. Can you still brand them as one and exit it as one business?
Yeah. Yeah. What would happen is, so when you go buy a business, let's say you were going to buy those 4 auto body shops, even though the current operator has 4, what you would probably do is you would acquire each one separately. It came up with one price. You would make the acquisition, but you would probably make it individually. So you'd come up with a price, and then you would allocate a purchase price for each particular one. And the buyer would buy it through 4. Some buyers might buy it through 1. I mean, but you would have no problem selling it because you're typically selling the assets of a business. You're not selling the actual corporation. So you're not selling that entity. If we had 100 people on this call, 95 of them would be buying the business as an asset purchase. And the reason why you want to do that is because you don't take the liabilities of the business. when you buy the assets. You'll use the name. So if you now are going out and you are now the buyer of Bob's, you would buy it under Gabe's LLC, but you would set up a DBA as Bob's Auto Repair 2020, whatever the year is. And you would be able to trade and continue to do business under the name. And you'd be buying the name as part of the business, etc.
Got it. I see. So so say private equity firms, do they only operate under one entity though when they buy tons of businesses? No?
Always a separate entity. They'll operate their portfolio. Well, they'll buy them out of a fund. So that's a little different. They're buying it out of a fund, right? And so oftentimes they're not setting up separate, the extent of the entities that they're setting up, they'll all fall within that fund. So when you talk about liabilities, don't worry, they're well protected, but they'll buy it. I'm trying to think of when we did the last one was done. They had an entity set up and the entity made the acquisition, and that entity is owned by their fund.
I see.
So there has to be a corporate entity for
Yeah.
taxes, because if not, if everything was lumped in, they would have to imagine having to combine everything just to report taxes. It would be a nightmare.
Yeah, you can't pass through the entity from like a lawsuit. You can't pass through to the other ownership. It's only at the entity level.
At the entity level. Now, I would assume, that if there was fraud related to setting up these entities, knowing that they were doing that because of the potential for liability or fraud in advance of something specific, I guess that potentially changes the dynamic. But they got good high price lawyers. I worked on a transaction. The buyers had a lawyer out of New York. It was $2,000 an hour.
Got to be worth it.
I went into their offices and it had like a 2-story glass staircase. And I'm thinking to myself, are they paying for the staircase? Or are they paying for the knowledge? I mean, this was like, wow, $2,000 an hour. So they know what they're doing.
Hey, Richard, I got a question.
Yeah.
With the same business I was talking about before, the 20% equity holders want to have no risk operationally or financially to the business going forward. The structure we proposed to them, they said that gives us too much risk, come up with something else. How would you do that?
Okay, so I think you wanted, their concern was they didn't want to retain that much equity because of the risk, or they just wanted lower equity. Because what you can do, there's certain things that you can indemnify them for. So if you understand, like, what is the risk? Are you worried that every time you guys have to put $100 into the business, they have to come up with 20? Or are they worried that if you get sued, they have 20% of the responsibility? Like, what seems to be
a bit of that. It was more they didn't want their shareholding exposed to leverage, so any debt, and or operational risk. Now, this is coming where they've had their only structure was just an LLC, as you guys would call it, and they were directors and shareholders of that LLC. So we proposed that they would be shareholders in the SPV. That would own 100% shares in the target company, and we would be the directors of the target company. They would remove the directorship of the target company and become shareholders, non-directors of the SPV. So they said, but who's the borrowing entity? And we said, well, the SPV. And they said, no, we don't want to be associated with the borrowing entity. So we put a FinCo between the SPV and the target company.
Yeah.
And the banks lend to the FinCo. And we're directors and shareholders of the FinCo. And FinCo is owned by the SPV, as is the target company, but they're not associated with the FinCo or the target company.
Now,
is that the correct? Is that the only one?
The only other way is for you to give them indemnification on debt. So let's say you're all in. We won't get fancy. You're all in on one entity, and you carve them out and provide them a legal document that says they are indemnified for any debt, right? You have this agreement with your 20% partner. Say, if we borrow money, you're not on the hook for the money. Well, you can do that. The problem is the lender may think otherwise.
Yeah.
The lender may say, no, we want everybody joint and several, and they've got plenty of money, so we want them on the hook as well. So what could potentially work internally with an indemnification may not work externally. In other words, when you go to get that, I think the way you've talked about it in different tiers, where you have a waterfall essentially of what they own and don't own, right? Because they're not going to own the fintech, right? Is that what? Correct. Then they should be fine. But you have to legally define what that relationship between the SPV and that buffer company is. Because could someone look at that and say that was done strictly to protect two of the five individuals? It never absolves you. Like if someone wants to sue the SPV, right? Nothing stops them from suing them. It just may not hold water.
Yeah. I think what they wanted was that, well, what we wanted, we said we wanted 100% equity available for security of the lines.
Yeah.
And they said, well, we don't want our 20% associated with it. So we said, okay, well, you sit up there, but we own 100% of the company via this vehicle. And the lender gets 100% of the company. They just, technically probably, that's our lawyers working through the
it
issues of
sounds
that.
conceptually without seeing the lines or whatever. I mean, when I say the lines, like the relationship between the companies, it sounds like it makes perfect sense for what they're hoping to accomplish.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
However,
but it's still fugazi. That's what you're saying.
100%. It's still potentially. Yeah. I mean, it's because what you guys have, what no one considers, and I'm not saying it's typical not to consider where you're sitting is you don't know how the person sitting on the other side, the bank, a lender, a plaintiff in a lawsuit. Now I know in Australia they're infinitely less litigious than they are in America, but you're getting better at it. But Australia's getting much better at it. When I left to Canada years ago, no one sued anybody. Now it's becoming like America. So you may have that internally protected properly, but that doesn't prevent someone from requesting it or going after the 20% party if they can connect the dots. They have to know that as well. So you do it with the best intentions of giving them the indemnification. That should work. And your lawyers are obviously very capable. That seems to be based upon how you're explaining it to me. Sounds like everybody accomplishes what they want to accomplish, except you and your partners are on the hook for 100%.
Correct. But, that gives us back to that original conversation I had earlier, that gives us the rights to sit here and say, well, you didn't want the risk and you didn't want this, and we've engineered it as such, but you're a minority shareholder and that comes with certain changes that they need to accept.
Absolutely. You can't suck and blow. You get it. No. You got to decide which one they want.
I might use that one.
No problem. If you feel the need, give me credit, but if not, no worries. You're on your own.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Richard.
Of course.
Of course, they will think when I go, my friend Richard Parker told me this. They go, who, the tiger?
That's right, the tiger from The Life of Pi. That's right.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Anyway. Okay, cheers.
Okay, but Mary grabbed her mouth when I said that. It's not dirty. You think, man, your mind goes to a bad spot, Mary. That's it. That's our questions for the weekend that I have here. The other note that I had here, I think, and Britain brought it up, was my other question that came up this week was if one owner is selling, and it wasn't even in Britain's deal, you want to have a mechanism, a predetermined formula to buy out partners. That's always a good thing to have in place. Sometimes it could be as vague as we're going to each hire an accountant. They're going to agree between the two of them. And if they don't agree, we'll hire a third, or here's the formula. We're going to use X times adjusted earnings defined as the following, payable as follows. You want to have that in place as much as possible. Because again, a partnership, and I'm glad we covered a lot of this today related to partnerships. They're all wonderful at the beginning, but you want to have things in place in case you need to take that partnership agreement out of the drawer at some point in the future. That's it. That's all.
Actually, Richard, I have one question. It kind of goes on to some one of the deals that we've been working with and that you reviewed. And so I was this the one deal that I'm talking about is the one that's supplier distributor, I'll say, and they have a huge amount of inventory available. And the one thing that we were thinking about is like wanted to know your thoughts on what are your thoughts on like having all this excess inventory or the majority of it like on consignment.
Yeah.
As like, so, that she's getting a portion of, it's staying at, the facility that we're purchasing, but she gets, when it sells off, she gets a portion of it and we get a portion of it or something to that effect, or is that how that would work out or?
Yeah. I mean, I've seen that done plenty of times. I've done it. Here's where I'll give you some pushback that you might get in the interim. So before even the pushback, that particular business and similar businesses, and I know we discussed it, oftentimes those businesses, the reason for their success is they're known as the people that are going to have the part, right? And I think refer to it, they don't have just-in-time inventory, they have just-in-case inventory.
Right.
People know that if they need a valve for one company I looked at for a washing machine from the Civil War, they can come to this company. They found the gasket there, and the owner was so proud of it. I said, "Yeah, but you sold like 4 of them in the last 25 years." But part of when they buy these lots or maintain it, that's what they're known for, and so they're able to make, or they should be making, massive margins on those hard to get parts. Okay, because people don't have a choice. Now, to your point related to consignment or whatever, it's done very often. What you want to be able to do is have a mechanism so that you can revisit it a certain period of time. Okay. If you work it out and you can, so that, well, we know that the business does $5 million a year. It normally needs $2 million. You got $4 million. So we'll pay you for half of it. And the other $2 million, as we sell it, you'll sell it. We make 50% margin or 10% profit on those things. I prefer the first negotiation step or first position is, as we sell it, we'll pay you for it. Okay. But there's got to come a point where I have to stop paying you for it. Because at one point, because it costs you money, it's warehouse space, etc. So there should be a sunset clause on that. So for the period of 2 years, we're going to buy X amount. On the rest of the stuff, as we sell it, we'll pay you. And then it sunsets in 2 years. I don't like the idea of the owners that they propose to you that they would take the excess inventory, because they theoretically can dump it onto the market and you may have some problems with the rest of your inventory. So I don't like that idea at all. It actually concerns me. Like, what is their agenda here? Right? Like that. And the other point, well, if you want it and it's so easy to get rid of, why don't you sell it now?
Right.
I've found that in those cases where there's excess inventory, and I've had it with a few companies, unless it's one of those just in case inventories, I like to find a way to get rid of all the non-performing assets. Just take that inventory to not lose your luster of being the place to go to, but to look at that inventory and just find a way to blow it out or throw it out.
Okay. Yeah, I think one of the challenges, and you kind of gave us some guidance on this too, as far as, then what inventory goes like in consignment, if we chose to go that path, and I know you said like, we'll look at what they actually sold in the last year or two. And that's the stuff that you want to keep, and everything else maybe is on consignment.
Or both. Or you just come up with a number, say there's $1 million of inventory. In this purchase price, we get $500,000. Okay. As soon as, based on the margins, based on the sales of the company, as soon as we deplete the first $1 million of inventory that were not replaced inventory that we didn't have to buy again, then we start paying you for the second half.
Okay. That makes sense.
Takes a little monitoring, because during this time, you still may have to buy some other inventory, which shouldn't count towards it.
Right.
You just want to be careful, because inventory businesses, in this particular, there's a couple of things. If you are in a business where you're carrying hard to find inventory, which sounds like this may be the case. I mean, if it's generally hard to find inventory, then you've got to exploit the margins. Like if you're, if your product that you have and some of it is obsolete, you got to rip and tear. Because people don't have a choice. I mean, you're not being unscrupulous. It's called being in business. Okay, because you're providing them with something they can't find anywhere else. So you got to make your margins on that. At the same time, you have to balance that delicately with not being in the inventory business. Because at the end of the year, when you want to figure out how much money you made, you and Mary are going to hold hands and walk to the warehouse. You can say, there's all our profit. And you don't want that to happen either. So, it's like, it's a very delicate balance. And sometimes you look at, I don't want to lose the sales, or I know we sold this one basket. You got to learn the business and learn to say no and try to get the best, have a good balance between the two. But you don't want all your money always tied up in inventory, because it's like a never ending cycle.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
All right. We're good to go. Thank you, everybody. It feels good. How do we always manage to do this? Just even though I don't care if it takes 8 hours, I'm happy to spend the time on the phone. But it's amazing that here we are, 4:58. Perfect. If there's any other questions, anybody needs me for anything, you always know where to find me. It's good to see everybody, and thank you for joining. I think these sessions are great, so hopefully you find them helpful and positive.
All right.
Thank you.
Have a good weekend, everybody.